Whenever I'm talking about birth with women, one of the main things I hear is a fear of pain. So I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more today and talk about the difference between pain and suffering and some things that you can do to help decrease the suffering that you experience during labor and delivery. So pain and suffering, two very different things. I first want to start off with saying that I think we can all agree pain is kind of inevitable during childbirth. Now, whether you choose to call it pain or intensity, that's up to you. Pain is something that is completely dependent on the person. You know, we all have different ideas of what hurts, what doesn't, how intense it is, how painful it is, that kind of thing. So in regards to pain, that's something that will happen during labor and delivery. And that to me is kind of easy to wrap your brain around because you know it's going to be a thing that will occur. Suffering, however, is totally different. And this is something that typically intensifies the pain response. So when we're talking about a fear of pain during labor and delivery, we really need to shift our focus to suffering and do what we can to decrease the likelihood of the suffering that we experience. So suffering is totally emotional. Pain is physical, suffering is emotional. So when we lose a loved one and we say that we are in pain, it's the physical pain that we experience from the loss, the emotional loss, the suffering that occurs. If you get your leg cut off, you're in pain and you're also suffering because it's extremely traumatic. So suffering is psychological, it's mental, it's emotional. Suffering does not have to occur during birth. In fact, a lot of people who have a really positive birth experience, they don't suffer at all. We experience pain, the body can tolerate a lot of pain. It's the suffering that really breaks us down. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we need to talk about suffering and the suffering that we cause to ourselves. So as a doula, I always tell my clients, my job is to make sure that you don't suffer. However, your job is also to make sure that you don't suffer, because a lot of the suffering that occurs, we're doing to ourselves. So suffering that we cause or we bring upon ourselves would be not being able to stay present, being extremely fearful. So if you are going through a contraction, you get through your contraction and then your contraction is done, you have let's say a 2-minute break, and the entire 2 minutes in your head, you're going, that was so bad, that was so painful, I don't know how I'm gonna get through the next one, I can't keep doing this, that one hurt like hell, how much more do I have to do? You're taking yourself out of the experience. You're pulling yourself out of the present, and you're causing yourself suffering because you're worrying about what happened, you're thinking about what just happened, and you're missing this moment, this 2-minute moment of peace and no pain. You're missing it because you're causing suffering. And so whenever another contraction comes, it's going to feel impossible because your head isn't where it needs to be. So suffering is something that we can control with a really healthy mindset. And one of the things that you can do for a healthy mindset is to practice mindfulness and remaining present. So a meditation is a really good place to start for this. You could also see a mental health professional. So especially if you have any past birth trauma or past life trauma that will come up most likely during the birthing experience, definitely see a mental health professional to get some better tips on how you can manage the suffering that may occur. Support during labor is also a big trigger for some people. When they are not supported, when we don't feel supported, when we don't feel heard, when we don't feel like we're in control of our body or what's happening to us during the birthing experience, that causes a lot of suffering. So making sure that you have educated yourself, maybe hire a doula or a support person, making sure that your spouse is educated and ready because their fear can also cause us to suffer a little bit. That's also really vital in ensuring that the birth room stays very calm, that there's no fear, that no one's, causing any type of emotional distress for you or for you to yourself. So definitely prepare in that way. I think going into birth without having done any type of education is, it's not something that I would recommend, because exposure makes us more comfortable. When we have a fear of the unknown, we have no clue what to expect. But the more that we can read and educate and watch people having birth, not in the movies, like actual births, the more that we can kind of familiarize ourselves with it and make it something very, very normal for us, so that when we're going through it, it's not like we've never seen or heard or any of the things that are happening. We're not caught off guard. We feel very prepared. Education is important because while I understand not wanting to instill fear in the birthing woman, I think it is important to know what can happen, so that, let's say, you are the small percentage of women who do have to go to an emergency C-section. This isn't something that, yes, it will be fearful, but it's not going to be something that you've never heard before, or that could be for anything during birth. Malposition of the baby, an anterior cervical lip. You're not going to be like, what the heck is happening? You'll be like, okay, this is okay. We can do things to adjust, that kind of thing. Now, ideally, if you had a doula, you wouldn't have to remember everything. So I say a doula is to make sure that you don't have to recall it all. You don't have to be totally knowledgeable on every single thing. Some moms go into it that way, and that's great, and some don't. But in the moment, you just want to be trying to have the baby, and the doula and the support team would be kind of working around you to ensure that that happens. But education is important because you never know what can happen, and so not being caught off guard is really key in maintaining that presence and not becoming overwhelmed or super fearful. And so in regards to pain, like we talked about, pain is something, whether you call it pain or intense or whatever, you will experience some type of sensation. It's the suffering that we can control, because the suffering is what leads us to have a negative birth experience. The suffering is what compounds to create that trauma. So if we can come at this experience with knowledge, with support, with empowerment, and with a healthy mindset, then you can have the most positive birth of your dreams, because you're totally prepared, mind, body, spirit. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please leave any questions or comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this.